Good afternoon. It's noon on Monday, the 23rd of March. I'm going to say January then, March. And I'm delighted to be joined by David in spirit, who may or may not join us. I know he doesn't do mornings, but we're now officially afternoon. So hopefully he will join us at some point, David Wake. He's booked in for pretty much everything that's going. So you will see him. If he doesn't arrive today, you will see him fairly soon. So first time to Self Pub Fest, Jill Todd, delighted to see you. Nikki Coppleston, you've been a couple of times with us, done Spotlight. Phil Oddie, sci-fi, as you can tell from his background. So we're here today to talk about dialogue versus description versus dialogue. So I will start, Nikki, with you. Good afternoon. I wonder how do you feel about description versus dialogue? Do you have a balance in your writing, or do you find that it's just very natural? It's not something you're very particularly conscious of?
I think it comes fairly naturally. I tend to prefer, as Jill was saying, I prefer dialogue. I don't like screeds of description. But
Mm.
obviously, sometimes you've got to have some description so people know what's going on.
Mm.
And I remember reading, I think, one of the books that John Grisham wrote, possibly before The Firm got published. And on the back of that, they published his earlier book. And
Mm.
it was nearly all dialogue, certainly in the first couple of chapters. And it was so exhausting trying to work out
Really?
who was saying what. And you just wanted to kind of put some context in things.
Mm.
So I think you've got to have that balance. And I love writing dialogue and I love writing scenes
Mm.
where I know what I need to have happen. I need what information the reader needs, so what I want to convey.
Mm.
And so I try to do that as economically as possible, so I haven't got to do a big info dump.
Sure.
Um,
Well,
I know
I
description isn't necessarily an info dump, but you just want to have that balance. So it keeps it interesting, it moves it forward. Description should really only be there to put some context on things and perhaps just to break up. There's a lot happening. You just want to slow the pace sometimes. You just want it's a bit like a passage of music. You just want a little bit of variety, so it's not all either tearing along
mm.
or just too much dialogue. You just need it to just liven things up a little bit. And really it's there to serve a purpose. You don't have description just to show how well off you've observed how the clouds mass on the horizon or something. It's
Yeah,
got to have a purpose.
yeah. And also it depends on the genre. I mean, you write crime, so it's naturally going to be quicker than, say, Catherine
Mm.
Cookson.
Yes,
I
yes.
compare James Patterson, who's very dialogue heavy, because he goes
Mm,
from
mm,
the detective to the villain and back and forth. And it's interesting you said
mm,
exhausting, because there's only one book of his I've read in one go, and that's his collaboration with Michael Letwidge, and it's called Step on a Crack.
mm,
And his chapters are very short. I love short chapters. That's
mm,
another topic I should do, actually, is chapters. And so he has very short chapters, and he has a hook at the end. And you're just about to find something out, or you found something out, and oh, okay, what does that mean? And then you're on to the next one. So you have to
mm,
read two chapters at a time to
mm,
sort of keep with it. But I say with dialogue to have no more than six threads of dialogue, so each character three times before you have some description. And it doesn't, there we go. And it doesn't have to be, hi David. And we're just talking about not having to dialogue um, too much of it in one go. And I say that it's sort of six threads. So
Yeah.
two characters saying three things before you have something. And you don't have to have a lot of description. It could just be Morgan picked up her mug, took a swig of very nice hot chocolate, and then have me carrying on speaking as I normally do. And
Can I just say, sorry I'm late.
that's
Uh,
okay.
my excuse is I got stuck into some writing and didn't realise the
Oh, that's
time.
okay. That's all right. No problem at all. Yeah, Nikki was just saying. So Nikki's just started, so we've not missed much. How that Jill and Nikki prefer dialogue to description, but Nikki has read in the past where there's been too much dialogue and lose track of who says what. And I say if anybody's not sure about a passage of a section of dialogue, to take the narration out, and if you can still follow it, obviously, I mean, if you have one character on one paragraph, another character on another paragraph, and so on, you can see who's saying what, but you still need to be able to keep track of it if you've got no description in it at all.
What do you mean by description? Is that sort of the sun came up in a beautiful way?
Yeah, anything really. Even Morgan picking up her, even though it's not, I mean, it is description because it's saying I'm picking up a mug, but anything that isn't dialogue. So even not necessarily a dialogue tag, but if you've got somebody doing something anyway, you wouldn't need the he said, she said, and so on.
I'm very much a believer in alternating paragraphs for dialogue. So it's like a tennis game. It's you know, Morgan said, David said,
yeah,
and you go back and forth. I'd be very, very strict in that. Even down to Morgan said this, David nodded, Morgan continued. You know.
Yeah. So David, you're now alphabetically first.
What with Wake? Good Lord, that's amazing.
Do you how much of each do you put in there? Do you find it depends on what you're writing, because you do write different genres, so do you find that it, say for instance, because Nikki writes crime, so she would probably have more dialogue because it would speed it up than description, but equally if you're setting something somewhere that people aren't familiar with, so say if you're writing a book set in France, not everybody's been to France, so you'll want more description than perhaps a generic office. Do you find with what you're writing, especially with your sci-fi,
yes,
because you're writing a different place, you need more description?
If you're writing science fiction, no one's been there, so you have to put in a bit more description. But do you? I'm not sure that's the case. It can get very heavy and info dumpy. So really, I don't think the type of genre necessarily dictates how much description or how much dialogue you use. I think it's more to do with the author themselves, what their voice is. I mean, I'm writing an adventure story at the moment. That's got quite a lot of dialogue in it, but the description uses terminology that you would use in Victorian times.
Okay.
So the genre is dictating the mix between dialogue and description and the type of description. But that's voice, not really genre, I feel.
Because also it depends on the era. Because if you're writing, I was just saying that I compared James Patterson, who's obviously contemporary, with Catherine Cookson. So she's describing the era, because she wrote it 50 years ago or so, of a certain era where things were slower, maybe uses longer words, doesn't use contractions, so I am rather than I'm, and so naturally the description is perhaps longer but also slower. Do you have a preference between, David, between description and dialogue?
I remember going to writers' workshops way back, and we would have the odd occasional expert writer or editor or whoever giving us advice, and they would always say, put in more dialogue. And then I kind of went away from that and did a lot of stuff in theatre, so a lot of playwriting. And that's just dialogue. You don't bother with description at all. So when I came back to writing prose, my natural default method was to go to dialogue. And almost I've got too much in now, maybe.
Do you? Can you have too much dialogue? See, I'm a big fan. I have a friend, a poet friend, who, I mean, you may find Dawn is the same. She prefers description. So I had a friend who, when she turns the page, if there's no dialogue, she gets a cup of tea and she settles back and she devours the description. because she loves description. Whereas if I turn a page and there's not a lot of dialogue there, I'm kind of skim read and okay, get back to the characters.
I think, sticking my neck out, I'm going to say it's 50-50,
Right.
But not always 50-50. So you need to break it up. So you need a page of dialogue, a page of description, not a whole page of description. That would be quite a chunk, wouldn't it? But I think you can take, when you're editing something, you can take a book and kind of hold it at a distance. So you can't read the words, but you see the shape of it on the page, the way it's ragged right. You can see, quite quick dialogue here. It's got a nice shape to it. If you have something that's nothing but a great solid chunk of rectangle of text, you go, oh no, that's horrible. Yes. Or alternatively, every single paragraph's a single word with people saying, no, yes you did, no you didn't,
Yeah.
That goes the other way.
Yeah. Because we do need peaks and troughs in our writing. Otherwise, I was saying earlier on that the James Patterson, the only James Patterson I've read in one go is Step on a Crack, and I was exhausted by the end of it.
But why were you exhausted? Because too much description or too much dialogue, or what?
Because he's got very short chapters. So in an average book, which is about 75,000, James Patterson, he has 140 something chapters. So they're very, very short. I know, very, very short, and they all end with cliffhangers. So you go, you've either just about to find out something, or we've had a reveal. And what does that mean? But he alternates between the detective and the villain. So you have to read 2 chapters to find out what that meant, what the ending, and then 2 more chapters to get to find out what there was.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love it. Phil, you as our fellow sci-fi author, do you have a preference for description and dialogue, or do you find that when you're writing it's very fluid? Because again, you're creating your universes.
Yeah, I think it is quite. I mean, I would say my science fiction is quite soft. It's not highly technical. It's very character led. So I think there is more room there for to balance out more dialogue and description. There is kind of some science fiction can be quite technical detail descriptions. You get sort of the specs of the spacecraft, and that's great if that's the sort of thing you're into. I try and keep the pace a bit higher, like I said, more character led, more action led. Which do I prefer is an interesting question. I quite enjoy writing dialogue, and I think when I'm certainly first draft wise, I don't really think too hard about it. It's kind of what I feel is needed in the moment. What do I feel like writing sometimes is the thing with the first draft, because it's just about getting it done. But I think when it comes to the edit, I think that the useful tools, that balance between sort of description, which can slow the action down a little bit, not necessarily, you can have fast-paced description, and similarly dialogue often tends to speed things up, particularly if it's a back and forth. But again, you can have dialogue that sort of isn't necessarily pacey. But I think shaping those things when you know what the story is that you're telling. I'm a pantser. I just kind of dive in and see where it goes. And so that first edit particularly is very much about shaping the story, because by that stage I actually know what the story is I've been trying to tell. And so using the tools in there, I think is really useful. I think we did it last week. We went. I'm part of a writer's circle. Shout out to the Royston Writers Circle. We had a meeting last week where actually we spent the challenge in the meeting last week was we all spent sort of 30-40 minutes trying to write a scene that was entirely dialogue, nothing else. No, not even dialogue tags if you could manage to avoid them. And so the idea, it wasn't a script, it's a scene, but you're doing it entirely through dialogue. And it was interesting how difficult everybody found that, even the people who are who prefer writing dialogue. It was actually a real challenge to do something that wasn't just a kind of blah. It's really hard to follow, and even on the page particularly, it's quite difficult to get across all of those things just through people speaking. And I certainly had a bit where I want someone to pick up a cup of tea at this point. Right. How am I going to get that across in what they say? Because my main instinct was. So I think kind of that balance and how you use those tools is an interesting thing. And I think going back to what David said about voice, I think that's a big part of it. It's about how you tell stories and how that comes through.
In playwriting, you were told to you should be able to cover up that side of the document, sorry, that one side of the document, with all the names of the characters, and by the very use of their words, you can tell who's speaking.
Yeah,
it's one of those little tricks.
Yeah.
That's another thing, isn't it? To how do you make your characters distinctive from one another?
Yeah,
without giving them an accent or
that can be a challenge. And that can look really weird on the page. Trying to force in an accent. I have tried that and then rewrote the whole thing to get rid of it because it was just horrible. But yeah, I think kind of if you are writing, if you're writing books, even short stories, whatever, if you're not writing theatre or scripts, you've got all of those tools. So kind of using them thoughtfully, I think is important, however you decide to use them.
Jill, you write crime as well, and we know from conversation earlier on that you're a big fan of dialogue. Do you have any sort of balance? Do you think about how much description you need ahead of time, or very like Phil, you just dive in?
Yeah.
And
I don't think I think about it ahead of time exactly. I think I've probably got in my head the idea of balancing it out. It's probably not quite true to say that I prefer dialogue in the sense. I mean, I like writing dialogue, I suppose, but I like writing descriptive stuff as well. Except that while I'm doing it, I'm always slightly nervous of thinking, okay, if I do this too much, I'm going to lose the audience, you or the readership, because people do have a very short attention span generally now, and they're used to seeing things visually and either on their phones or on TV. And so I suppose I've always got in my mind that I want to put description in, because if you're writing a scene, you're kind of making yourself the lighting cameraman, the sound engineer. You want to put the atmosphere in, but in such a way that people are still seeing that video in their head, if that's the way their imagination works. And so those things are kind of feeding into the characters. And sometimes I think I use description to show how characters react to the scene that they're in, if you like. And if there is no scene, you can't show that. Like if they're in a situation that they're scared of or whatever really, or enjoying in some other way, sometimes you need that surrounding description to fill in the blanks in a way that is more difficult to do in dialogue without making it longer. And I know you tend to think that dialogue makes it shorter, but sometimes it doesn't, because you have to decide what you're going to expand into a scene and what you're going to gloss over in a couple of lines. And it would tend to be you're picking the more dramatic bits. I suppose I do like to fill it out a bit as if it were in a theatre or on a screen, so that people can see it properly.
Sure.
So
I didn't
mean to just think I was going to do a John Grisham and just have no description at all.
Yeah. Because you have two books published with a third on its way. Do you set them in fictional or real? I think you don't need to set them in fictional places rather than real locations.
Well, the first one, the one that Echo of Bells, the one that now I've self-published. What happened with that one, just very quickly as background, was that a small publisher in the Midlands published it, and it was sold in the Smiths up there, but only as a local interest book, because it was set very definitely in the Malvern Hills. And I think that's why the publisher took it, because they were local people. But because it was a 5-year contract, and that's now expired sometime during COVID, actually. So when I eventually had another small publisher bring out the next book, a different one, which was about the same people, so I suddenly thought, oh, now you can self-publish things on KDP. And so having had the rights returned to me, I then brought out the first one to support the second one. So they both kind of came out again on Amazon simultaneously, pretty much. So I can't remember where this was going now.
My question really was whether, if you're using real locations, because obviously the people who know that where you live will know your places.
That's right. I mean, the first one certainly was completely real. That was a completely real location, except for the actual buildings. The house wasn't real. Them and so on, and little cottages here and there, but the places, I don't think I invented any places at all. Whereas the one that has just come out, it's called Avalon Sky. That one, because it's set in Somerset, and because there are a few nefarious goings on, and which involved some people who are quite important in the community. I didn't want to set it in a real place because it might have cast aspersions on people who actually were in that village. So I thought it was safer to have a fictional village within a real area. And I think there's only one, apart from there's an aerodrome as well and an airfield that I've invented, but in general, it's just very specific small places within a real setting. Yeah. And a lot of the towns that I mentioned, they're all real. Yeah. So that was just to cover my own back, really.
Right. I did the same with my first two after Jessica and Hitman Sam. I set them in fictional places, but they go to real places. So in Hitman Sam, he goes to Northampton General Hospital. And part of it, the same with my serial series, Serial Data, Serial Dieter, they're set in real places, but I've created... So the first one was in what was the Chronicle and Echo newspaper. So that was a real location that's now a modern Aldi supermarket. And then the second one is a fictional office that is on a plot of grass next to a real building. And she goes around Hemel Hempstead and Tring. So they are real locations. So, and I did it really as a bit of a marketing, and I'm no marketeer, and so it was a moment of saneness, so that I could then, people from the area would be more interested in the books because they are set in a real location. But you do have to get your facts right, don't you? If you're setting it in a real location. And I think for the minority who live where the book is set, they will know where it is, but nobody else does. And most of the sales will be to people who aren't from there. So you still have to give the description from whether it's real or not.
Do you do a little map? So I have a little map overlaid over Google Maps image, so that I know where my fictional village is in comparison to how long it takes to get to everywhere else that's real.
Right.
And do you do that?
I didn't. No. I think I just kept it simple enough that I knew. So with the Hemel Hempstead one, I knew exactly where the building was in relation to the town and what they call the magic roundabout, the plough roundabout, which is 6 roundabouts around a middle centre, fixed centre.
I met someone from a book club that had done one of my books last Friday, and she complimented me on getting things accurate because it was set in Bourneville and Birmingham,
right?
Which is quite nice.
No, absolutely. So, Nikki, description generally shows us narration, and the narrator telling us what's going on and where they are. Dialogue is your character. How do you distinguish your dialogue between your characters? Do you find, because you're writing a series, aren't you? So you have core characters.
Yeah.
You have your core characters. If you're introducing somebody new in a book, how do you make them distinctive? Is there a trick that you've learned from that?
It just sort of comes naturally. I mean, Lincoln, for instance, he can be quite blunt speaking, but he never uses the F word, for instance, whereas other characters do. And that there's certain little verbal tics that some of the regular characters have got. And as David was saying, you sort of could cover up who's meant to be speaking and just I think I could certainly tell who it is who's speaking because of the way they respond, for instance. But when you talk about description, I think Jill touched on it just now about about voice. If you're describing something my characters often, everything isn't all from Lincoln's viewpoints. It's often from the viewpoints of other characters in different chapters. And the way that character will respond to their surroundings tells you about them, whether they like something that's very rural or whether they feel intimidated by it or scared by it. So the description can be quite powerful in that way because depending on how you write, you're seeing the surroundings from that character's with that character's eyes.
Mm.
In terms of dialogue, it's really just a matter of making sure that their voice is a bit different in some way. Either they perhaps talk more tersely than somebody else, or they're, you know, over eloquent, or just use a lot of cliches. But it's just a matter of getting to know those characters and knowing, well, he wouldn't say that or she wouldn't say it like that, and recognizing what would be the sort of way in which they'd express themselves.
Yes. And how much description do you put in? I'm thinking of Lee Child with Jack Reacher and the furore that when it was announced that Tom Cruise was going to play Jack Reacher. How much description do you put in of what your characters look like, Nikki?
Not a lot. I think, I mean, but I personally like to visualize the main detective, so, you know, the detective fiction I read. Myself, I don't really want to be told one thing. I mean, a great example is Elizabeth George's the Inspector Linley series. When she first started them, at some point she describes Linley as being blonde. I thought, well, he's not blonde, he's dark.
Right.
And then so when it's on television with Nathaniel Parker, he was
Yes,
dark.
he's very dark. Yeah.
But the Barbara Havers character, although Sharon Saul was very good as that character on television, she was totally different. I mean, I kind of visualised Barbara Havers a bit like Sandy Toksvig, sort of small and dumpy, and quite different. So I don't go in for too much description. Just enough. And again, coming back to what we were saying about description earlier, whatever's relevant, what you need, not put in any more than you need to put in. So it's obvious, for instance, why somebody might mistake somebody for somebody else because they're both blonde or whatever. So not put in too much more. Leave the reader to use their imagination.
I think
because I think that's far more fruitful than describing somebody. I mean, okay, Lincoln is kind of a bit scruffy, middle-aged, sort of not knocking 50. Doesn't look after himself terribly well. Not a snappy dresser. That's in a sense all you need to know, and the rest you kind of fill in the blanks.
You've just given a very, very good example of something I read that J.K. Rowling does, in that she comes up with 2 or 3 characteristics, visual tics, I suppose, for each character, and then uses 1 or 2 of them every time the character comes back into the scene. So, if you always describe somebody as being untidily dressed, then that's enough to click into the character again. But I think it depends on voice. There are people who spend lots of time describing the character, and that's quite lovely to do. There are other people, shall I say, thriller writers, who quickly do it more like a screenplay, where they just say, "Oh yes, he's untidy." It's a question of taste, I think.
J.K. Rowling is a great example with her Robert Galbraith books. And I read one of them, the Corman Strike. And I read one of them, and I happened to comment on Facebook that I found it a bit insulting that when she was writing the dialogue between a character who is working class, well, the main characters, she would reproduce that speech really sort of syllable for syllable with lots of apostrophes for letters dropped off the end of words. And I felt it was a bit insulting that she did that, where the character was perhaps black character or working class character or somebody not terribly bright, by her reckoning. And so I just feel this is very old fashioned. You to have to reproduce dialect, almost somebody's accent, quite so slavishly. That's the best word. But the number of people who said, "Oh, don't we like that? I love to be able to actually hear what that character must sound like." And it was really strange that, and again, she does loads of description. I feel those books are very under edited. Look, I was really surprised at how many fans she has. People, really. So no, I love the way I can hear that person speaking because she describes it so syllable by syllable. I know exactly how that person will sound. And I love the descriptions. She can do loads of descriptions, and that is sort of quite counter to me. But I was surprised at how many people really love that kind of thing.
I suppose it
I-
depends on how often it appears in the book. Because if I get books to edit that have got a lot of colloquialisms, then if it's 5% of the book, that's fine. But if it's more than that, I'd say it's because it can be very tiring because you're trying to work out. There was a book I had to edit, and there was one character who used different pronouns, that not pronouns that it was a fantasy book, not pronouns that we would recognize. And I got confused and the author got confused, and I said, well, if we're getting confused, then the readers are going to get confused, because it wants to be a very fluid read. So I think it depends on how much of it, if it's a minor character, a lady running the local shop, then that's different.
I think how well it's done as well is absolutely critical. It's like directing people on stage and they want to do it in an accent, and well, if you could pull the accent off for the full 2 hours, great. But if you can't do it, even if 2% of the time you drop out the accent, then don't do it at all. And I think the same as if you're writing it down. If you can pull it off and it's clear, great. But if you can't do it all the time, don't do it. Because if you think about it, if you get somebody with a really strong accent, like a Glaswegian, really extreme, you can't understand a word they're saying, if you ask them to write it down, they'd write it down correctly. They wouldn't drop the G at the end of going or anything like that. They write it in standard English. And now I know there are poets and people who can do dialect, but you've got to do it well. Otherwise don't go anywhere near it.
It's probably true of so many things, that there are no rules. As long as what you do you can pull it off, you have the skill to do it. I'm just you talk about writing a dialogue, I just suddenly thought about Train Spotting by Irving Welsh, which is pretty much entirely written in Edinburgh dialect, transcribed on the page. And I whipped through that book. I found it a really easy read because you tune in and it's done so well that it works. I would imagine there are, well, certainly maybe people not from Edinburgh couldn't pull that off, but I also think there are probably other writers who do have that background who also couldn't pull it off. And so a lot of it's about the skill of the writer and what you can do. And I think you have to sometimes rein in your kind of what you would ideally like to do, just to kind of fit with what you're capable of realizing in your voice, in your context, with your characters. There's so many things come into play.
And I think if it's set in the same, I mean, we're used to Scottish accents here, whereas if it's an American reader or a European non-English native reader, it would be that much more difficult before you even start going into any kind of dialect. So I think you have to consider who might be reading the book.
It depends how brave you are as well. Because I don't think, I suppose really, because I tend to write about places that are not my home county, I wouldn't be brave enough to do more than hint that someone's got a certain accent, because I don't think I could pull it off convincingly. So I'd hope that the reader, if they come from there, just read it in that voice to themselves, and hopefully that works. But I think, I mean, you can sort of hint that people are not totally grammatical or not totally this, just in the way that they phrase things. But I think I don't think I've done anything braver than say that one of my characters had barely a trace for Somerset accent.
Because once it's established, then we know that person's from a certain place. And then you don't have to necessarily be sort of hit over the head reminding you he's from Glasgow. When he left Glasgow, he missed Glasgow, and you don't need it so often.
Hello there, he said in a thick Glaswegian accent.
Exactly. I had a lodger actually who was from Glasgow, and it took us a week to. I mean, he understood me, but and he toned it down. I think that's another thing you can do up to a point. Is if you've got two characters from different backgrounds, then they'll meet in the middle. And one may be used to, oh yes, well I'm living in England. I've learned to tone down my colloquialisms or something. It depends, doesn't it?
And if you go with that person back to their hometown, suddenly their accent racks up again.
Well, I used to say that when I drove down, because lived in Northampton for 31 years, that as I drove down the M1, I could feel myself getting posher and posher.
One of my actor friends did a story about traveling down the M6, up the M6, and he did it in the accent of the place he'd got to during the journey.
Oh, really?
Quite extraordinary performance. Yeah, you knew you'd got to Stafford because it was a Stafford accent. Not that I knew what the Stafford accent was at the time, That was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Very clever.
David, having written scripts, do you find the dialogue different at all? Very different between writing scripts and writing novels? Do you have to treat them a different way?
Only in the sense that they're formatted differently.
Okay.
If you're doing a play, you don't have to put double quotes around it.
Because obviously with a play, you're watching them do the description, whereas plays
do have description in them, so you've got to describe what's on the stage and so forth, and actions that people take. I mean, I do remember getting a play published, and they came back to me and said, "How is this action performed?" And I'm from the Sarah Kane school, whereas if you could write it down on the page, it can be staged. Right. And they wanted an explanation of how you would stage this, and so I said, well, okay, in this production we did this, in that production we did something else. But I didn't like doing it in the play. I only did it sort of get through their editorial process, because to my mind that's the director's job. And in an odd way, when we're writing prose, we shouldn't do the director's job, the reader's job. The reader has to bring their imagination to it. So if we're describing a tall tree, it doesn't really matter how, whether someone's thinking of a 20-foot tree or a 40-foot tree or a 60-foot tree. It's a tall tree. Let's get on with the story.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I certainly, as a reader, those overly detailed kind of putting in the things that I want to create for myself. Those are the bits that kind of throw me out the story and cause me to.
But if you're a writer whose voice is one for quite beautiful description of the tree and the moss, the bark, and the way the leaves are rustling in the breeze, well, fine, go for that. I mean, somebody said earlier about narration, and I had to jot this down, because description does three jobs, doesn't it? There's narration, as in you're saying what the character thinks, what their opinions are. There's description, as in this door was green, and then there's action. The character burst in through the door, and they're three different elements, and we're really talking about the middle one, the description, the amount of detail about the door and how it was constructed, and what the wood grain was like, what the door knocker was like, and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of description that we've been using, whereas narration, the person's thoughts, that's quite a different animal. So when you say how much dialogue versus description you should have, well, how much dialogue versus narration, description, and action you should have.
Yeah, that's different, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think some of my longest little blocks really of description are not description of scenery. They're description of a fight or something, or something actually happening, whereas people aren't in a position where they can speak at that moment. But that's not the same thing as creating an atmosphere of a scenery, is it?
That's
completely different.
Purely action, isn't it? So does that cut into your description quota? I would say not.
No, well, I suppose you hope you've got people hooked enough by the speed of what's going on. I suppose isn't description, but what description that you're talking about that might slow it down? It's really the scenery description that can slow the pace, isn't it? And possibly if you put a lot of reflection and thoughts in, that could slow the pace. But things where you're making something move quite fast, but just nobody's talking, that is really a different animal, isn't it?
Yeah, but your novel could be about the main protagonist's internal monologue. So
Yeah.
you could have internal monologue that goes on for 3 or 4 pages. I'm not suggesting you do, but you could have that, and it could be absolutely gripping.
It could be,
That's
yeah.
what the
People are very
story's about.
yeah, I can do that. I can't. I don't think I'd be able to maintain people's interest. I wouldn't trust myself to maintain an interest for 3 or 4 pages of internal monologue. I just wouldn't.
Maybe you should try it.
People might close the book and never open it again.
Yeah, but you can do it in an early draft, and then when you're re-editing it, you can go, oh no, that's
I mean, you always end up. Well, I always end up with longer first drafts than the final thing, anyway. But
yeah.
But that's a good way of getting to know your characters is giving them a long internal dialogue, even if you don't use them.
That's true. Yeah, even if you don't use it,
Yeah.
Good old free and direct speech invented by Jane Austen. I'm not sure she actually invented it. But she was the one who popularized it.
I always start by going alphabetically. So David, you were left off the hook first thing. So I'm going to go for the last point, going from Phil through to David. So Phil, Nikki, Jill, David. Obviously, you want to hook the reader. We'll be talking about beginnings in a couple of weeks, and then we'll be talking a week after that about the saggy middle of a novel, and then endings the week after that. So obviously we want, in theory, fairly short chunks as you go into a novel to get your reader hooked. And then once they're hooked, you can then elaborate and then have something happen in the middle, have something that keeps them interested in the middle, and then wind down to the climax at the end. Do you find that you write, again, very loaded question, Phil, do you find as you're conscious of getting them in at the beginning and then keeping them there by the middle and then tying everything up at the end, do you find that then the balance of a description and dialogue, that this changes at all with where you are in your book?
That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about. So in the series, I've been writing 4 books so far, and just sort of reflecting. The first one starts off very little dialogue. It's one person traveling into a city, a lot of internal monologue, some interactions, but very little dialogue. The second book, at the beginning, plunges you literally starts in the middle of a conversation, and then the later ones again tend to start with, I like to jump into kind of something happening, and often that will be something happening between some people. I think that's kind of where I go. So I think the middle is probably the bit where there's most place for dialogue, because by that stage you've introduced all your characters and you've got interactions going, and a lot of the drama is coming from those sort of relationships and those everybody's differing, competing motivations, and then so probably the most dialogue heavy bits for me happen in the middle. It also helps, I think I said earlier, I quite enjoy writing dialogue. I quite like a good amount of dialogue in what I read as well, and so I think that bit where the middle is where it can sag, you can get bogged down. I find that's a tool that can help keep the pace up, keep people interested, and again, kind of good stories coming from conflict. What better way to illustrate conflict than having people disagreeing out loud in dialogue?
No, I love reading short stories or novels where it starts with dialogue, because you are thrown into the character at the beginning, especially if you need the conflict fairly early on. Yeah, thank you, Nikki.
Well, I tend to usually sort of have some dialogue very early on, and usually probably some sort of scene which tells you what the crime is going to be, what the crime is probably going to be. So I try to keep dialogue and description balanced all through the book. But obviously with crime, you've got to serve that purpose of explaining things and increasing the tension and lots of red herrings and so on. So I suppose perhaps with crime, the dialogue and description sort of serve different purposes. But I think you've got to keep it up all the way through. I think that's the best way to get information across and keep the interest up and keep it pacey.
Because I suppose also it depends on, writing a crime novel, you'll have perhaps a bigger cast of characters You'll
Yeah.
have the
Yeah.
detectives and the team and the CSIs and so on and so forth.
Mm.
So that gives you more opportunity, more of a
Yes.
pool
Yes.
for
Yes.
having dialogue.
Yeah.
Jill, how many characters do you have on again, loaded question, in your books? Do you have
I don't actually know quite a lot. There are quite a lot, but I haven't listed. Well, I just did this amount originally, but it's so long ago. I'm not even sure. I think
yeah.
they're not all main characters. Some people just like walk on parts, really, that you see in one scene who, if they go and interview somebody or something. But I mean, it's not procedural. It's not a procedural crime. It's just a thriller with like lay people, if you like, most involved. There are police in it, but they're kind of more in the background. But I did the beginning of the latest one, Babylon Sky. I did slightly differently from how I originally intended, because I thought, I actually sent it out to some publishers like this. Just I started it. I thought, oh yeah, I've gone straight in. There's quite a lot of dialogue. You're straight into various types of tension and so on. And then it was only after about a month or two that I realised that it didn't actually start like a crime novel. It starts with the tension and between the characters and relationships and the family stuff. So I thought if you just read, it's like a straight novel for about 20 pages. You don't, unless you've read the blurb, I suppose you would have done, but you don't realise it's going to be a thriller. You think it's going to be about the conflicts within a family. So then I kind of hoiked out a little chunk, which I adapted slightly so it didn't give anything away, and from right near the end, and put it as a little 3/4 of a page prologue, so that people would actually read that and think, oh, what's going on then? And then it goes back to like 2 weeks earlier, and so I tried to sort of cheat, really, so you got a bit of everything. But yeah, I hadn't done that with the previous one, but because I was thinking about pace and conflict and all that sort of thing, it didn't actually occur to me that you wouldn't know there was going to be a mystery and a crime unless you'd remembered what the blurb had said.
But we often lull ourselves into a story, don't we, when we're writing the first draft, and then find by sort of chapter 3 or 4, oh, actually something's happening now. This needs to be brought earlier.
So, yeah, I think it did improve it. Well, I wouldn't always necessarily want to use a prologue or want to use a flashback. I think just that reason, I think in that instance, it did improve it. But I guess it's just,
Yes, prologues is another. We'll be talking about those at the beginnings, because I never used to read prologues, and as a reader, especially if they're called prologues. So when I get books, and if there's one called prologue, I say some readers won't read them. And we did this poll a few years ago, and there are people who just don't read them if they're called prologues, because they want to get to the action.
I like prologues.
Do you?
Well,
I say have a date and time. So London 1066 or 1666 or 1966 or whatever, and then so we know the where and when. And if somebody's read that, and never make it any more than 500 words. So if somebody's read the prologue, there's a date and time, they know where we are and when we are, and then all of a sudden we've got chapter 1, and they haven't realised.
I love reading prologues.
Do you?
Yeah, I'm desperately trying to think if I've written one.
Right. Well, I do planning and writing a novel course. I'm doing it at Swanwick this year, and so we talk about prologues. And I'd say, and usually when I was teaching for Northamptonshire Council, we had sort of 16 to 18 people each class. And I'd say, does anybody here not read prologues? And there was always one person in 16 to 18 people who didn't read prologues.
Oh,
but if you don't call it a prologue, give it a when and where, or even just London present day.
Thrillers will often have a flash forward, don't they? Where they show you a bit of action.
Yeah.
Which is saying to the reader, don't worry, we're going to have all this family stuff, but we're going to get to the thriller and the murder.
Yeah, that's what I think is useful about them, really, or useful in crime novels.
Yeah. Well, when I the feedback I give, I say, well, it's not the author's fault; it's the reader's fault. If they miss out, if the prologue contains information they need to know, then they're going to miss out on it. But that's the reader's fault if they're not reading a prologue. But give them a chance of reading it by not calling it a prologue.
It's the same as if the reader said, well, I only ever read odd-numbered chapters.
Yes.
Yes.
No, as an author anyway, you have no control we're never going to be sitting there, are we, when our readers are reading? Wouldn't that be lovely?
Yeah, you have to accept quite early on that you have no control over how people are going to read your book.
You could do it with an ebook, couldn't you? You could have an ebook saying, "Oh, excuse me, you didn't spend long enough on that screen. Go back."
Yeah. And David, you could write a formula for that, couldn't you?
Got a computer program, I could do that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I was in research on this as well, so I've got the background for it.
Right.
I wouldn't, but yeah, tempting.
David, last word on description and dialogue.
Well, the reason I was late is I'm writing the next book in the Dear and Do Club series, and it was a bit where I've got 3 sisters and I alternate between their viewpoints, and they were going to this waterfall. Not relevant. They're doing a journey. So it's that chapter has the 3 points of view, and it's doing the same job. You know, the chapter has to get them from A to B effectively. One of them is on their own, so there's no dialogue in that section. The next one overhears some people but doesn't interact with them, so it's got some dialogue, but doesn't involve her. And the other one has sat down with a meal with a vast number of people, so there's an incredible amount of dialogue in it. So it's not I've got to the middle of the story, I must put some more dialogue in. It's what are the characters doing dictates whether they're talking to something. If I wanted Ernestine to have a conversation, I've got to add another character in because she's got to meet somebody to have a conversation. If I wanted, if I felt Charlotte's bit needed more description, I'd have to remove the characters or have them all sitting around saying nothing.
And that's the thing. I mean, that's a perfect point you've raised there. If you're writing a book in the first person and there's no one else around, you're not going to have your character necessarily talking to themselves all the way through the book. So there are plenty of instances where you can't have dialogue because otherwise it's wrong thing.
Well, there's that Tom Hanks film where he was marooned on an island.
Yes, Castaway.
Castaway, thank you. And he had a football or a
basketball. Wilson.
I think he put a face on. Yeah. So you could have some dialogue. Otherwise,
yes. Afraid basketball.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it depends upon your voice and the story you're writing.
It does.
As to how much dialogue and description there is.
It does, absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you, David, as always. Thank you, Jill. Lovely to have you here. Nikki, welcome back. And Phil, thank you. Your first time as well. We'll be seeing you. I know you've booked in for a few Mondays and TNTs and brilliant. And David, I think you're going to may as well pull up a couch and get comfortable because I think you're on almost every Monday going, which is wonderful.
I enjoy these because, writing's quite a solitary thing, even though you're with a lot of characters having dialogue. It's nice to take a break and chat to people.
It is. Exactly. And even if we talk, because I will be repeating the theme sort of in later weeks for anybody who misses taking part. And I think you only need 1 or 2 people who are different and slightly tweaked panel.
It's nice if someone disagrees with you. If 2 people on a panel disagree. I remember doing a playwriting course once, and it was led by 2 people, which is very odd. I've never come across that before or since. And they prepared their lesson, as it were, and they were mostly on script as they went along. But occasionally they disagreed, and at that point, everybody in the group got out their notepads and were writing down desperately because that's where the gold was when they disagreed.
Well, when I'm walking the dog, I have my iPod in, and it looks like if I see, very rarely, sadly, see a juicy argument going on, it looks like I'm turning up my volume, but I'm actually pausing it because I want to know what they're saying. We are nosy, aren't we? I remember years ago I went 10-pin bowling, and I've mentioned this before in these things. There was a manager who'd got 3 stars out of 5. And there was a lady who ran the bar, or behind the bar anyway, and she had 5 stars. So I went up to the manager and I said, "You'll have to excuse me. We usually preempt our questions, don't we? Excuse me, I'm a writer. I'm a 2-year-old. I'm really nosy. But why have you got, as the manager, you've only got 3 stars, and yet the lady behind the bar's got 5 stars?" And he said you get a star for each department that you work in. And although I'm the manager, I haven't been here very long. So I haven't done the training in each section. So that was why. Well, yeah, we want to know everything about everything. And at some point it will go in, I call it fiction fodder. At some point it will go in our books. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. David, Jill, Nikki, Phil. Lovely to be chatting with you again. And this will go up on YouTube today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.